record on this computer. And so here I am. It's October the 3rd. I'm with Lana Wickstrom, and we're just kind of catching up in life and also from last meeting.
Absolutely. I am really excited to be able to spend some time with you today, Gary, because I have about 4 or 5 questions that have been percolating in my practice lately and wanting to know how you experience them. And also I think that they're timely because I know for me in September, I have 3 kids. They're all under the age of 11.
Wow.
And they are 6, 9, and 11 right now, and they are all engaged, and we let them choose one activity, and they're allowed to be in one activity. And so my oldest one's a swimmer, my middle one's a dancer, my youngest one is a soccer player. And so September always represents for me my new year. So I'm not a January 1st New Year person, I am a September 1st New Year person.
Well, that's because you're a parent, and you know, as parents, our lives are organized around the school year, around the academic year, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think also too, just 7 years in post-secondary also just reinforced that even before I became a parent, that renewal and change starts in September. And that's certainly a pattern that I notice in my work with families when I'm helping people separate and divorce outside of courtrooms, whether I'm helping them individually as a coach, as a separation and divorce coach, when they're experiencing the transition of separation and divorce, or whether I'm working with both of them in terms of mediation role, or whether I'm working with both of them in terms of some co-parenting coaching. So what I find is now I'm feeling a little bit of relief in the first week of October because we have a new schedule in place. We've now had 4 weeks of the new schedule. We've had 4 weeks of figuring out who goes where and the troubleshooting between my husband and I about if I'm picking up so-and-so, who's picking up the other people, who makes supper those nights, who's responsible for groceries. And so now we have this month underneath of us. And so I feel a little bit more confident about going through for the remainder of the fall. And it's always reminding me how if my husband and I, who have good communication and a solid relationship, are having challenges with this, clearly families in separation and divorce, it is just a tremendously overwhelming time.
Good points, by the way. Good insights that there are those times of years of the year that will prove particularly stressful for anyone, and then more so for separated parents.
Absolutely. And I find myself trying to pay attention to those more and more, the more years I'm a parent and the more activities my children get into, and just the more responsibilities we as parents have. And that certainly impacts the rest of the space that you have to be able to take on the life's daily challenges. And so what I have found is in my support of families in whatever service option I'm offering to people is September is a time of stress. So September is a time of renewal, it's a time of optimism for some, but it doesn't represent the same thing for everyone. And I often find parents struggling right now with different versions of what their children are experiencing. And I want to know from you some of the techniques or some of the approaches you take to certain situations. So for example, knowing that children of separation and divorce certainly are always going to be thinking of themselves half mom and half dad, and taking those reflections with them as they progress in their experience of their parents' separation and divorce. I always see that the children are going to be one way with mom and they're going to be one way with dad. It's not necessarily inauthentic in either of them. That they're acting a certain way, sharing certain versions of things in order to be of service to the relationship, either with mom when they're with mom or with dad when they're with dad. Inevitably, we experience this point in time where parents are needing to make a decision, lots of decisions, especially this time of year, about activities, about where they're going to be going, about who they're going to be spending time with, what level of sport they're going to be in. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, when you've worked with families before, what is your propensity to talk to kids in those situations when you have mom says she wants to competitively dance, dad says she doesn't want to have anything to do with dance. You and I both have our theories about why they might be extolling those disparate views to mom and dad. But in those situations, I'd like to know from you, what is your appetite to involve or speak to the children? And if you don't, what do you recommend? That being one set of the questions. And second, what tools do you use to explore with the parents different ways of looking at the information children are providing to parents, so that you can explore with curiosity what the root of what they're discussing with you or sharing with you actually is?
Phenomenal questions, by the way. So the first is, do we, or at what point do we, or if we do we, how do we include children in the
all of that?
You know that whole workshops, whole books,
Absolutely.
Courses are provided on this.
And
I'm only going to spend a few minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other is, how do we help parents to appreciate that children may provide different perspectives to each parent, neither of which is wrong, but is different. And, how do we help parents to understand they don't have the perspective, they have a perspective from their child.
Absolutely.
Okay, so firstly, I'm personally, in terms of how I work, I'm really reluctant to bring children in, particularly children of separated, divorced parents. There is a difference for me if it's an intact relationship and the child has depression or anxiety or is being bullied. I'm still reluctant to bring the kids in, and I'll go over that in a minute. But even more so if those parents are separated. And here's why. And some people have chastised me for this thinking. So, still make up your own mind with it. This is just Dierenfeld. So I'm reluctant to bring kids in, generally in any circumstance, because whether we like it or not, counseling in and of itself, meeting with a third party professional in and of itself, two things. It can be scary for the child, and it can be stigmatizing for the child. The scariness comes when very often, a child is acting out, there's behavior going on, and talking with a third party may be presented as a threat or a punishment, or with an implication that you're crazy, bad, or stupid. Well, you know what? If I were caused to think I was crazy, bad, or stupid, or about to get a talking to, would I ever want to meet that person? As the kid, I'd be terrified. So there are those issues. Now, on the issue of stigma, depending on the age of the child may not experience a concern for stigma. If we're talking, a preschooler, not that we're counseling preschoolers, but a young school-age child, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, they may not think twice about meeting with a counselor. But I still do. And here's why. That child grows up. That child becomes a teenager. That child becomes an adult. And if that child finds themselves in conflict with an intimate partner, and the intimate partner learns of childhood counseling, I worry that it can be used against that person. Oh, well, you're crazy. You went to a counselor when you were a kid. See, therefore I'm right and you're wrong. Now, I'm using a lower male voice and saying that I don't want this to come across as gender unbalance. It's an equal gender issue. So when we're concerned for about a bad outcome in terms of the stigma, we refer to these unintended bad outcomes as iatrogenic effects. It's a word borrowed from medicine. An iatrogenic effect is an unanticipated bad outcome of a well-intentioned intervention. And so people and parents and even other counselors and lawyers, they look at counseling as if it's innocuous, like it's drinking water.
You're right.
And I need to tell people it is not. It's a serious intervention which can do good and can do harm. And some of the harm may be because it was provided poorly, but also some of the harm is it could be provided well, but still have these iatrogenic effects. Mm-hmm. So wherever possible, I try to work through the parents to mitigate the need to even see their child. It may be handling a mental health or a behavioral issue or an academic issue. And so if I can help the parents to manage the situation in a way that will be more constructive for the child, different from how they may have thought of how to manage the situation, I don't need to see the child. Mm-hmm. And the parents will come back to me and report, how's the child doing? Well, actually, the child is doing better. Gee whiz, Gary, your guidance did the trick. And more often than not, Lana, that's the case. And so I don't need to worry about iatrogenic effects. I don't need to worry about a kid being scared coming in to see the counselor. Not always helpful that way. So sometimes we do still need to see the child. If there's an allegation of abuse, the Child Protection Agency must see the child. Anyways, if through the discussion with the parents and perhaps having tried something else first, if it's not successful or if concerns remain, then maybe it is appropriate to see the child and get firsthand from the child and offer the child some strategies to manage. And I do that, by the way. But then the issue is, how do we prepare the child to come in? Mm-hmm. And so, I explain to parents that don't admonish the child, don't use the therapist, be it me or anyone else, as a threat or an indicator that they're bad. Just explain to the child that we're kind of stuck, we want to help you, and it would be helpful to hear from you directly. And given that parents have already met with me, I tell parents, tell your child that you met with a really nice guy. Tell that to your child. Really nice man. And I tell the parents, even if you're acting, look up and say, and wow, he was so wise. Nice guy, and he was wise. And where it's about me, I tell the parents to tell the child, and he has white hair and a beard. He's an older man, but he's quite wise and quite nice and lovely to get along with. I want the parents to chat with the child in a way that when the child forms an impression of who this guy is, I want them to think of Santa Claus. Wise older guy, white hair, white beard. Yeah. They will go to Santa Claus. They will think of that. Kids have come to me. I said, did your parents talk about me? I said, yes. Who'd you think you were meeting? Santa Claus.
That's adorable.
It is. And it's disarming for the child in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's to see you. It's this nice lady with glasses. Mm-hmm. And, she kind of feels like a good teacher. Okay? So whatever image you want to project of yourself through the parents to the child that disarms the child and makes coming hopefully a more positive experience just to getting to your door.
Mm-hmm. And do you distinguish your willingness or your appetite if, I know that you're reluctant as a first outset to work with children or bring the children into any process. If you do you have a different appetite of reluctance or more open to doing it as the kids are older, or does their age impact your assessment of whether or not you'll do that at all in terms of meeting with a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old?
No, it's not an age thing. Okay. It's a first do no harm thing, right? Be aware of the iatrogenic effects and ask yourself, do we necessarily need to meet the child in order to be helpful with the child? Can we structure things in the child's environment such that it mitigates the issue?
Okay.
So for any age.
What about any situations where the children are already having a relationship with a counselor, a therapist, a school counselor, or situations where it's recommended that if the children don't come in to see you, Gary, that they go and see someone else, or that they have whatever your version in your jurisdiction is of this Voices of the Child report, or somebody who works with a counseling agency who purports to or does meet with the children and provide an unbiased or neutral impression of, quote, what they want or what they're thinking. What are your thoughts on that?
So I got a phone call last week from a person who wanted me to become a member of their organization.
I saw this.
Don't get me started.
Okay, I want to.
The person is affiliated with other people who are part of men's rights organizations, and was telling me that, you know, in the work that they will do for separated parents, they'll also do interviews, recorded interviews of the children to use for court purposes. And there's no process to this. It's one parent, unbeknownst to the other parent, brings the child in for somebody to interview. And you've got to know, that's what is being described is not an interview. What is being described is an interrogation.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes beyond the child's awareness that this is actually an interrogation versus an interview. So,
and what is the child told that this is supposedly doing? Or
I haven't a clue. I haven't a clue how they prepare the child for this, quite frankly. I just know what the nature of the interviews are. It isn't, you know, I'm not being told that they're interrogating, but you may use different language with me, but when I unpack the behavior,
right,
that's the language I use to describe the behavior. Anyways, I always tell parents, first of all, you never want a one-sided interview where only one parent between separated or separating parents is facilitating this, because the moment it is one-sided, it's inherently biased. Inherently biased. And most courts know that. Not all courts. So sometimes we're still educating the court about that. But most courts know that. And it invalidates the quality of the interview. And then, of course, the issue is who you are taking that child to for that one-sided interview, if that's what you were doing. Because already anyone who would engage in a one-sided interview, which means only one parent knows about it, only one parent is bringing the child, anyone who would engage in that doesn't appreciate best practices. So already you've either got a biased person, unqualified person, or an inducted person.
Absolutely.
So parents, you know, if you want to bring your children to get what we call a Voice of the Child report, assessment, whatever, you're wanting to ascertain what's the kid's experience, feelings, and thinking. Mm-hmm. There are processes for doing that in a balanced manner that mitigates harm or iatrogenic effects to the child. And those processes most typically include the interviewer, assessor, meeting with both parents, be it separately or jointly, you know, depending on the issues between the parents. Some you can't meet with jointly, you know, there may be a protection order for one parent against the other. But that interviewer will meet with both parents ahead of meeting with the child and will offer guidance how to prepare the child for this meeting and interview. Now, having said that, I'm always still reluctant to see kids engaged in that kind of activity. And here's why. Whether you have what you think are good parents or whether you have what you think are bad parents, once parents are deadlocked in a dispute over the care of their children between them, and that child is going for an interview, you have to know that the parents are going to be concerned about the information the child is going to convey to the interviewer. So what does that mean? It means I may directly or inadvertently seek to influence that child's, the content of that child's communication to the interviewer. Some parents say, I only told my child to tell the truth. If I had $1 for every time I heard that line. Mm-hmm. Because then you have to sit back and say, tell the truth. Whose version? Because you have different versions. Mm-hmm. So already, as soon as a parent tells a kid, tell the truth, you have a bias situation to which the child is exposed. And then you have a child who is more caught in the middle, not less. Mm-hmm. You'll have a child who will be more stressed out about meeting with this person, even if the person is described as Santa Claus.
Right.
And we'll taint Christmas, if we go that route.
Yeah. I recognize that in your practice, you backed away from any kind of service that has the prospect or the openness to be involved in court intervention. And certainly that's a cardinal aspect of any service I provide as well. I left my life as a courtroom family law lawyer because of that. So I'm wondering, to what extent have you experienced, since you've done that and backed away, so whatever version of, I'm using the term Voices of the Child, but that is a court-related document in our jurisdiction. So to what extent have you ever in your practice done a version of that, but not, and made it clear that it's not a part of court intervention, it's not going to be used as evidence? Historically, have you done that? And if so, how have your thoughts on that changed?
So I love working outside of court because there's so much more flexibility in terms of what you can do and provide, and in terms of agreements that parents can enter into. With respect to Voice of the Child, I have met with a number of kids outside of court processes where I need to gather their understanding of what is going on and what their needs and wants are. So you can absolutely do this outside of a court process in a peacemaking process. Mm-hmm. If you familiarize yourself with the work of Woody Mostyn, mm-hmm. He has more strategies than Campbell's has soup. And, listening to him and presenting with him and being at his workshops and reading his books, you realize that literally anything that you could do in a court process, you can do in a peacemaking process. Oh, yay, yay, yay. And look, there's mine. We're twins. Phenomenal book. So, in answer to your question, yes, I've provided this in peacemaking, through peacemaking services as well. And so I want to come back to answering the questions, though. Do we talk to kids? If so, how so, and why so? And, I just want to summarize. Yes, we can, but should we? And if we do, how do we mitigate harm? And so prior, with the concern of first do no harm, I wonder, can we not work through the parents first? And if so, and that successful story done, so there's this, kind of decision tree. If that isn't sufficient, then yes, we can consider bringing the child in. Be mindful that how the child is prepared and how the parents have presented and spoken of this experience to come can create distress for the child. So we need to coach the parents how to invite and prepare their child. And then when we do meet with the child, wherever possible, I want both parents present, personally, at least to start in the interview. So
that was my next question.
Yeah, so that the child has a sense to get comfortable with me. And, because otherwise, why would they be comfortable with me? I'm a total stranger. So to chat with the parents, to chat with the child in front of those parents. And again, there's tremendous differences between what occurs in a counseling or clinical context versus what occurs with separated parents. So in a clinical context, typically I will conduct the whole interview with the parents present and chat with the child about their behavior or concerns or mental health problems or the bullying, so that the parents learn from the child what their experience is because of the kinds of questions I ask. And then we can talk about how to support the child. And the parents understand fully everything that's going on. It's not a mysterious process. Between separated parents, very often one parent brings the child and the other parent brings the child. So there is a concern for bias being built in by the process. Best case scenario is both parents, well, I should say it's not always best case scenario that both parents come at the same time. There's so much to tease out in that. Has there been allegations of abuse, domestic violence, drugs, alcohol? There are safety concerns in terms of figuring that out. But we do want to meet with that child at least on 2 occasions, maybe even more, so that we can bring some balance, so that we can test what we learned in one meeting against what we learn in another meeting, so that we have a bit more on which to share things with parents.
And on those 2 tests, I'm assuming that the goal of that would be mom bringing them on one time and dad bringing them on another time, in order for you to test those differences about what kind of reaction, behavior, influence that may have.
Yes. And also, depending on the style and training of the interviewer, there are such varied techniques, from those that we gather from play therapy, from talk therapy. Rarely, if ever, would we ever pose to the child, which parent do you want to be with?
No.
But I've certainly had experiences where kids have come into these interviews, look at me square in the face and say, I want to live with X parent. I go, okay. Anyone help you to remember that? That's a lot to remember. Oh yeah, X parent reminded me so I wouldn't forget. I said, well, you know what? You've done a great job. You've told me. Now let's talk about, what you do at both parents' homes. And you hear what they do at this parent, and you hear what they do, and you know what? They're enjoying themselves at both parents. And they talk nicely about both parents. And there's no data to support from the child a preference truly for one or other, even though the child came in, so I want to be with this parent. We ascertain that point of view may have been either directly coached, or the child may, in our chatting, which parent do you worry about? Do you worry about one of your parents? Why would you worry about it? Well, that parent always cries, or that parent tells me they're sad when I'm leaving, or that parent, right? So, we're trying to understand what are some of the influences upon this child as well when we're doing this interview. And again, there's so many projective tests or activities, draw me a picture. Who's your family? Where are they? And they draw this picture and they say, help me to understand it. Help me to understand it. Why is this person standing out over there? They were mean to me, or they were mean to mommy or daddy or brother or sister or the cat. I said, how does that make you feel? Okay. Do you see that person? Oh, okay. And when you're with this person, do you miss the other person? When you're with that person, do you miss this person? Yep. Or maybe it's no, or maybe I'm afraid, or maybe, who knows what the child provides. I must tell you that more often than not, you get enough information from a child to suggest that they want to be loved by both parents.
And what's your process when you're debriefing the information that you've received from the children if the parents aren't present? Or I missed the distinguishing factor when you said you needed counseling, or in a clinical atmosphere, the parents are there. In a separation and divorce atmosphere.
In a separation in divorce, I typically will spend some time alone with the child, concerned that given that the parents do have different agendas, might there be some subtle influences even during the meeting that I'm not picking up on. We have if you're a gambler and you play poker, we talk of people's tells. You know, if you have a good hand, you have a bad hand. Well, your eye just twitched. And when you double down and your eye twitched, I know you're bluffing, right? So parents have tells to children and to each other that says, don't say that, don't go there, remember what I told you before, I better like what you're saying. And so it's still, in these situations, it is important for the interviewer to meet with the kids alone to reduce the likelihood or impact of influence in the interview itself. Yeah. And then going back to, you know, what do we learn and how do we report that? We have to be so careful, because if a parent has influenced a child or wants to influence a child, and the child's behavior is not consistent with the parent's direct or indirect instruction, we have to worry about that parent's feelings back towards that child. And if a child, hey, you know, you ascertain, I love both parents and I want to have time with both parents, whatever time means, that may be received as offensive to one parent who believes no one should like the other parent. So this information is serious and can have dramatic effects on one or both parents. And so when we're doing this kind of work, we don't just rush in to interview the kids. We meet with both parents first so that we can get a feel for those parents and get an appreciation of how they may respond to different information we may provide, so that we, as the interviewee, can be prepared to provide the feedback in a way that it can be best received and worked with. And so this is not a job for the novice. This is a job that takes considerable skill and training. And so when I hear of organizations that will bring a child in for a one-sided interview to be taped in order to use that tape in a court process, it's abjectly wrong. Abjectly wrong. And can be remarkably destructive to that child and to the whole judicial process, particularly if accepted by a court of law.
Absolutely.
My points of view.
I want to touch on some further questions about what, building on the theme that we're talking about whether it's a court intervention or if it's an out-of-court intervention that you're using in a peacemaking service that you have. So we are on the cusp in our jurisdiction of having parent coordination become legislated. And the regulations of parenting coordination have not yet been, of course, anticipated. And so we're not sure what the requirements are going to be or what they're going to be calling the rulings or whatever it is that the parenting coordinators are going to be deciding. So in my practice, I think it was back in 2006 and 7 when I was a practicing lawyer, I took the parenting coordination training in British Columbia. And it struck me that I wasn't quite sure how much appetite people would have to follow a parenting coordinator's ruling as much as they do a judge's ruling, because it was much my experience that there was no custody and access police that were roaming around my city enforcing any of these orders in the first place. So I have always backed away from doing anything where I'm making a decision, and I'm always offering services where I'm making a recommendation. Then you can take that recommendation or you can not take that recommendation, but you're paying me to be able to give this to you. And it's not likely that I'll continue to work with you if you continue to not be able to demonstrate an ability to learn from or incorporate some of the recommendations that I've made. Talk to me about how you see the efficacy or the use of parenting coordination in your jurisdiction. And you at one time, I believe, did practice parenting coordination, and now you've actively from that. Can you talk to me about that?
Okay. So let me give a bit of a history lesson. Mediation started to take off in the 1990s. And in 1990, I swung into private practice. I had considerable experience in children's mental health and some experience in child protection, working at a child protection agency. And I threw out my shingle and Gary Derenfeld social work. Then I get, and I've been doing assessments for years, be it child protection or mental health, and making recommendations. So I get a call from lawyers saying, hey, Gare, would you ever do a custody and access assessment? And you got to know, there was no training for it back then.
Right. Okay.
There was no legislation. There was no rules. I don't even know if there were standards of practice back then. And so you say, yeah, sure, I'll do a custody and access assessment. You chat with a few colleagues. Do you do this? Do you do that? How do you do it? What do you do? And I rely heavily on my mental health experience and training. And my mental health experience and training was in a children's mental health center. So I was always working with parents in, any capacity, parents in any kind of relationship and issues with respect to their kids. So I'm not new to this. And I would do these custody and access assessments, and slowly you get known that you do these things. Then you get a call and say, and the lawyer says, Gare, do you do mediation? I have this separated parents, they're in dispute, they don't want to go through an assessment, but if somebody were to just sit down with them and talk it through, I think they'd come to an agreement. Would you do that? Well, how different is that than some of the other counseling that we do? Mm-hmm. Okay, and again, before there are standards of practice, and there's mediation in the corporate or civil mediation, but now applying it to domestic situations. Sure, I can do mediation. And, so you're ahead of the curve. I mean, look at the gray hair, I'm 62. You're ahead of the curve in terms of these processes being formalized. Then I get a call also mid-1990s, Gare, do you do arbitration? These folks have agreed that whatever you tell them to do with respect to the care of their kids between them, they will do. I've explained to these parents that if there's a custody and access assessment and it goes to court, the court's likely going to order what the assessor recommends, which is true. Not 100%, but oh my gosh, 80 to 95% are the stats. At least it's been years since I've looked at those stats, but that's certainly what it was back in the day. And so, rather than going through that whole rigmarole, they'll just cut to the chase. Tell them what to do, they'll do it. I said, sure, I can do arbitration. And Lana, it was on a handshake.
Mm-hmm. Contrast that to the paperwork now, right?
And so then in the early 2000s, you get a phone call and says, here, do you do parenting coordination? Mm-hmm. What the hell is that? Well, separated parents who don't get along, they're continually finding themselves in dispute, and they need a referee. And the referee can either help them to resolve the issues between themselves with a mutually acceptable agreement. And if they can't do that, you tell them what to do and they do it. Say, sure. Another handshake. A handshake, Lana. Well, 2006, I think it was 2006 or 2009, I'm losing track of time, here in the province of Ontario, there are amendments to the Arbitration Act that require anyone doing arbitration to have had a 40-hour course in arbitration, 30-hour course in family law, 2-day course in domestic violence screening, and went from no contract or a 1-page contract. I think I had a 12 or 14-page contract. So that informed also, of course, arbitration, and also how we did parenting coordination, which was referred to as a secondary arbitration, because it's already been arbitrated that you can do it. And so some of the provisions for primary arbitration are taken care of. You can just go ahead and do it now because they've already agreed that they're going to do it. I may not be representing this 100% accuracy. I'm giving you the gist. And I'm saying this because there may be other people one day that look at this tape with our permission and say, that was 100% accurate. Yeah, okay, shoot me. So now we have a much more formalized contract in place for how these functions are performed.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're doing this, we're moving from, for me anyways, the 1990s, the 2000s, 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
With each successive decade, Lana, people seem to have been getting angrier and angrier and angrier.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen to the work of Bill Eddy, he more than suggests that there is an increase in persons with personality disorders, particularly of the narcissistic and borderline type, and an increase, a subset of those persons, an increase here as well, of those who are prone to high conflict. All or none thinking, unmanaged emotions, they need a target of blame, somebody to blame things on. And so as we're getting more formalized in these processes, the people that we're serving are increasingly more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And so what initiated all this information to you? You would ask me, you know, do I think people are following what the parenting coordination is arbitrating, if they're arbitrating? And my answer to that is, I witness, which is only me, so it's not to say that this is generalized, but I witness, I see that what happens in the court system these days is mirrored in parenting coordination. So more anger, more hostility, more positioning. You know, in the 1990s, when I would arbitrate, somebody may not have liked the outcome. You know, it may not have met with that person's wants or expectations. But you know what? They would still shake my hand, say thank you, and work within that. With each successive decade and each successive year now, there is a greater propensity to shoot the messenger, sue the messenger, complain to the licensing body of the messenger, and find ways to undermine the outcome in order to have another opportunity to achieve one's preferred outcome. So if you're going to engage in this practice, have a lot of malpractice insurance. There is a tremendous likelihood now that at some point in time, you will either be sued personally or be taken to your licensing body. You have to practice remarkably, I'll call it clean. Hold more of your cards close to the chest. You have to present, from my point of view, as emotionally neutral. You have to be this is just, people may say, Darren Feld, you're crazy. Okay. But, you know, because if we so much smile at one and then look at the other, why did you smile at me? I was working with a couple recently who are separating, and I wanted to meet with them individually because of some issues that they were raising and how they were managing their own behavior. So I wanted to coach them.
And this was in a mediation context?
Counseling, separated parents, counseling context. So I meet with the one parent, and you know, it was about a 45-minute interview. I meet with the other parent, and the other parent heard what I had to say very quickly, integrated it, and was fine. I said, okay, so maybe that's enough. Maybe we can bring in the other parent. And then that parent says to me, but wait a minute. You spoke with the other parent for 45 minutes. You only spoke with me for 15. That's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, okay, let's talk some more. What would you like to talk about? They talked generally. I mean, it wasn't anything, but there was a perception by that parent that they may not have been treated fairly as a measurement of the time spent with each of them. And I'm not the parenting coordinator. I'm not the arbitrator. This is simply in counseling between parents who are in a process of separating. They're still under the same roof. They haven't told the kids yet. They're still in a process. And so we have to be very mindful of balance in working in these situations, lest the service provider be called out for being biased. So, you know, I've had a multitude of complaints, many of which, or most of which, arising in the context of working with separated parents and dispute over their kids, where one complains that I'm biased in this one or that one, or that I've been abusive, literally abusive to them. You know, if I go, what the hell are you telling me? Or, you know, with their permission, I use foul language. I always ask, can I use foul language? It's part of my informed consent process.
Yep.
Do you ever use foul language? Yes. Well, I use it too, but I won't call you names. You don't call me names. So sometimes I'll look at what the F is that? But I'll use the full word. And they'll say, he swears at me. He called me a. So there are remarkable risks, and if you're going to engage in these activities these days, I would just suggest to you be remarkably circumspect with respect to your own behavior. I come out of the 90s. We could be remarkably casual, and people would respect that. They would appreciate that. Mm-hmm. These days, working in the context of separated parents, very different. The other difference, and we may have spoken about this before, and many parenting coordinators may not realize this because they're coming from often a counseling background. This isn't counseling. Mm-hmm. People who are coming to parenting coordination, they're coming there to prove the other parent is wrong, or is a scoundrel, or doesn't know what they're doing, and therefore their view of what should transpire is more appropriate. In counseling, people come to us because they are in distress personally, and they want to self-examine. In parenting coordination, don't tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what the other person's doing wrong. I didn't come here for that.
Yeah, and I think that the clientele or the cohort of people that require parenting coordination services have expired, or not necessarily even expired, but have some aspect of their constitution that is resistant to counseling. And that's when Billy talks about the high conflict personality or the high conflict behaviors, is that you're just resistant. You're not able to use self-reflection, right? Which is a necessary element for counseling to be successful for you. And I often feel as though I have a natural disinclination to be able to work in that area because they're looking at you as just a cheaper version of a judge. Is that how you see it?
Boy, I never heard of it expressed that way, but I like that. The PC, the parenting coordinator is a cheaper version of the judge. Yeah, and maybe more easy to trample.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think about, and I talk to people about this when I'm working with both of them as a family, and what do you hope that this agreement does, or what do you hope that this order does? And I hope it makes someone accountable. I hope that, you know, this will be the final decider. This will make sure that we all know where we are. And asking them about, what do you think, who monitors an order, or who is responsible for engaging and making sure that the behaviors or the expectations in the order or the agreement are fulfilled? And people are shocked to be able to find out that there is no such thing, and I use this term all the time, is there's no custody and access police. Nobody's roaming around making sure that that happens. And so when you're looking and you've finally gotten to the point where you feel as though you need a parenting coordinator to be able to tell the other person what happens, you're usually working with an echelon of people who will give the finger just as much to your parenting coordination order as they are going to be to a court order.
So when parenting coordination was first developed and came out, and actually it was developed in the 1990s by a woman who I have to apologize, I forget her name. I've worked with her, I've presented with her, and I'm having one
Joan?
Sorry?
Joan Kelly?
She was one, but there's another woman.
Okay.
And I feel terrible because her name isn't just coming to mind. Seniors moment. You know, it was a different era and a different day. You know, and as I said, with each successive decade, people are getting angry, more personality disorder. So it was a good process. It was. When I practiced it in the not the 1990s, in the 2000s, I think I was remarkably helpful to a lot of people. By 2012 to 2015, I started seeing myself a shift in the kind of persons who were being referred and who were partaking in the service and their likelihood of follow through. And I was seeing increasingly less compliance to the outcomes that were imposed, and more complaints. So I don't, you know, this started, as many movements do or services do, with good intention and good outcome. I don't know if it is as helpful a service anymore for all the things that we've talked about.
Yeah, and I also
and I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not that we discontinue the service, but we really have to discriminate. Who might this be helpful for or not helpful for? And you need to have some disqualification criteria. And some of those criteria are: how many other persons have you burned through? How many lawyers have you burned through? How often has this already been to court? Have you made any complaints against any other professional of any kind, in any capacity? And by that I mean, if you got a parking ticket, did you not only just fight the parking ticket, but did you also fight the person who gave you the parking ticket? You know what I mean? And so these are risk factors. So if you're going to practice parenting coordination, familiarize yourself, and I've presented at this at AFCC meetings in the past. You have to familiarize yourself with the risk indicators to determine whether or not you want to take that referral on. And you also have to determine your own appetite for risk. So all these things you do in the full light of day. Is this helpful?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that I wondered, as a final observation to be able to make, is that, do you find that obviously when we talk about Bill Eddy's observations about anger or hostility or lack of compliance and the increasing perhaps prevalence of high conflict personalities, is it also to your observation that those, while they may also be increasing, they may also be louder because of social media and the ability to be able to send messages? And so that's my observation, is 25 years ago, this disgruntled person just could be disgruntled at Coffee Row or to as many people as their voice was effective in meeting. And what I'm observing is the power that the voice of those disgruntled people now has directly impacts.
Lana, I don't have a high-profile colleague be it another social worker, psychologist, or a family law lawyer who works, has been working in the field for more than 5 to 10 years. I don't have any of these colleagues who don't have disastrous things said about them
Right.
on different websites, including myself.
Mm-hmm.
Disastrous.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to tell you, when I first read some of the disastrous things written about me, I was sick to my stomach, if not literally, figuratively. It was like being sucker punched.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start Googling your friends and colleagues, and you realize, oh,
Yeah.
wow, right? And some of the referrals will have found those. And it was really interesting because I was scared that it was going to kibosh my practice.
Mm-hmm.
Terrified. But then I started getting more calls. Why? Wow, I saw what was written about you. Were you ever working with a nasty person? And if you could work with that nasty person, maybe you can work with mine.
The psychology, you can never anticipate how it plays out.
Right? Oh my goodness. And so, as practitioners, when that stuff emerges, myself included, we can feel tremendous shame or embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
But I would encourage other people to Google the names of their colleagues. And you will find things written about, not all of them, but some of them, that is remarkably unflattering. And then you realize, social media.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do have a policy with everyone that I work with. They are not allowed to post comments or anything from our meetings on social media, nor are they allowed to do it by proxy. Oh, I'll get my friend to right? You can't police this stuff, right? And you can't protect that, but I at least mention that in policy. And Lana, the other thing I do with all my, services and client meetings, I record every single one of them. It's the only self-protection I have. Yeah. And as soon as, first of all, it's on my website that I may do that. And then when they walk in the door and they take a seat in my office, I click a button and I say, just to let you know, I record all my meetings. And I do so so that I can be accountable. So if you ever have an issue with me, we have something to go back to. And I got to tell you, I had a complaint, I'm losing track of time, a year ago, August, with a person in a counseling context who went on to make all sorts of vicious complaints about me to my licensing body. Thank goodness I had the tape.
Interesting.
So they said, this occurred and that occurred. And so at those spots in the tape, I was able to say, please go to timestamp, here and timestamp there, and you will hear the actual dialogue, mm-hmm. where none of these things happened as alleged. So, it's a different time, it's a different era, there's a different risk profile for professionals working with separated parents, particularly high conflict separated parents. Mm-hmm. And there are a limited number of strategies to protect the professional. Mm-hmm. And recording is one of those strategies. I've recorded probably some 300 or so clients over the last number of years. And on one occasion only, I had a client, a person say, well, I don't want to talk to you if we're going to record it. I said, that's your discretion. You don't have to work with me, but this is how I work. Mm-hmm. And, I'll happily refer you to someone else. But as soon as somebody tells me they don't want me to record, to me, that's a risk indicator as well, even though it is a reasonable concern. Yeah. It's both, right? Mm-hmm. I've had one other person, and this is in hundreds of clients, say to me, oh, do you have to, hemmed and hawed, and then said, yeah, okay, we can do that. said, and are you sure? And this is on recording so that it cannot be perceived that I'm coercing, that this is just my standard operating practice.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it took me a while to get comfortable doing that, quite frankly. And some people would say, why? And I'm truthful. I said, because people have made complaints about me. And I have no way to defend myself. It becomes a he said, they said scenario. And this is the only way I have of protecting myself.
Mm-hmm.
So
very interesting.
If you're going to do some of this high risk work, I encourage the practitioner to engage in risk management strategies.
Mm-hmm.
I have had occasion, and I also make it clear everything's out of court. No, you can't have a copy of this. This is only for this purpose. And I say that verbally, and then, there comes a point in time where I go over my signed policies, my written policies, and then there is another statement in there. So I have it recorded, and then I have it signed.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of risk management. And so I have had, only on one occasion, somebody say to me, I forgot what we discussed. Can I have a copy of the tape? And I said, no. That's not the purpose for which it was made, so I don't release it.
Okay. Well, I greatly appreciate you sharing all of these tips and expertise, especially as being somebody in the jurisdiction who has an interest in being able to see how this unfolds, not an interest in necessarily practicing it, but just seeing it how it unfolds and being able to share this knowledge specifically with other people who are contemplating or anticipating wanting to practice parenting coordination in this jurisdiction, so that they can now start to proactively think about some of these things as regulations are being created and be able to provide that kind of input. I think it's extremely valuable. So even if I myself am not going to or anticipate myself doing parenting coordination, as a member of the public who will be consulted about this, and when we're creating the regulations or who can proactively offer feedback, this is the kind of information I want to be able to offer into our community, to be able to say that as we're developing this, we also have to think about protection for the professional, and protection from the professional
Totally.
Specifically on the segment of the population we're dealing with who has these characteristics, these attributes, and this kind of power with social media and access to it.
Yeah. So I just another message about parenting coordination. I still get referrals for it. Mm-hmm. And I make it abundantly clear, no, I don't do that, but I'm welcome to meet with these clients, these persons, in closed counseling or mediation. I don't care what you call it.
Right.
And sometimes, the caller who is one of those parents says, so you won't tell us what to do? I said, nope. I may suggest, here's some things you can think about, but just know this can't be used in court. Well, how do I know that my ex is going to do it?
Right.
And I talk with a male voice, so I can't avoid that, but it's an equal gender opportunity. It's an equal gender opportunity. And I said, well, what makes you think that just because somebody makes an order, your ex is going to follow it anyways?
Exactly.
Right? So we can avoid all those problems, and I can still give you some input and guidance, and it'll be up to the two of you what you do with it. Because at the end of the day, it seems that even with the parenting coordinator, it's still up to you what you're going to do with it. Mm-hmm. Even if you sign something that says you're compelled to do it.
Right.
What's the likelihood of your partner or yourself following through meaningfully on something you don't like? Mm-hmm. So why even go down that path then? And so I am working with higher conflict separated parents in that capacity. And for me, it's a luxury because, after 1, 2, or 3 meetings, if one or other isn't kind of buying in, looking at themselves, altering things, finding some solutions, I'll look and say, we gave it a try. I don't think I'm helpful to you.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, you're very helpful to me. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I really enjoy being able to ask these questions of you and hear the reflections that you got to be able to help me ask better and more curious questions about how I'm going to develop my practice and about what ways that I might be doing that, and certainly be able to share that knowledge and expertise with other people who are looking at developing these kinds of things in our jurisdiction. It's really meaningful for us to be able to talk to other people who have been there, done that, to be able to see what we can incorporate and improve in our own practices. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. With your permission, can I post poll or part of this to social media and
Absolutely.
use this as a teaching tool?
Without question, and I'm certainly going to, I have some email listservs of people in Saskatchewan who are working on developing some parenting coordination as well, and I might be able to link them up to hear what you have to say and what the wisdom that you have to offer for the situation.
Great.
Great. Thanks so much.
So we're going to meet in another month? Is that
Absolutely.
Yay.
Yay. Thanks so much, Gary.
Take care.
You too.